Good?
Yep.
Okay. All right, so this is mostly for the people at home. If you're taking notes and you want to get the extra credit, make sure you put time signatures on. So when I start talking about something, you have to put like at 1 minute, you talked about this thing. And then take the notes, explain it. And then on the left-hand side, left in the margin, put like 3 minutes and 20 seconds. So you gotta have those time signatures, you gotta watch the whole thing and then take notes. Turn it in the day of the test, you'll get 10 bonus points, okay? Also remember, and this goes for everybody obviously, the take-home essay is due, and then the Mean Girls analysis will be due the day of the test. The take-home essay, you have to have at least one journal article cited, a peer-reviewed journal article. There's a video on the wiki which explains how to do that. You can find that through what's called EBSCO Mega Host, okay? And that's a free service through the library at the school. If you're at home, you got to go through a password thing. The video explains how to get that, okay? When you show up, you have to hand me a copy of the essay with an attached abstract from the peer-reviewed journal article. And then you also have to hand in your Mean Girls. That can be typed if you want, or it can be handwritten. It doesn't matter either way, okay? Other thing I would say is I handed out the rubrics that have the discussions that you're supposed to be doing, the discussions regarding the chapter assignments, and then also the music video analysis. Again, I'm not going to grade that like final until the end of the quarter, but if I were you, I would do them all, like so far right now if you haven't, because it's going to help you to study, you know what I mean? So I would try to do them if I was in your shoes, okay? All right, so regarding the test format-wise, there's 50 matching, and it's in groups of 10. And then there's 50 multiple choice with 5 options each. The matching are just like mostly identifying what terms are, and they're for the most part grouped by chapter. So the first 10 would be like the overview, sociology stuff. Second 10 would be chapter 2 on culture. Third 10 would be socialization. Fourth 10 would be social interaction, status, role, stuff like that. And then the last 10 would be groups and organizations. Now there's some people in there, okay? So it'll say like the name of a person, and then it'll say something that they did that was important. So let's start with the people, because that's what a lot of people ask about, all right? Who's the main guy that came up with the theory for conflict theory? You can just say
Karl Marx.
Karl Marx, okay. So he wrote a book called The Communist Manifesto that in 1848, which basically laid out his theory, okay? That was used for communism and conflict theory, all right? Now for functionalism, it's Parsons is one of the main guys. Faber also kind of did some functionalists and some SI analysis. The main 2 guys for SI theory are George Herbert Mead and Charles Horton Cooley, or C.H. Cooley. Mead, if you remember, came up with something called the theory of the self, okay? Like a self, S-E-L-F, like the picture you take without the I-E at the end, right? So, what did Mead identify as the self? The part of your personality, but what did the self include?
Isn't that how others view us?
That's Cooley's concept known as the looking glass self. Okay, so that's also an SI concept, but that's not the exact definition. But to Cooley's concept, he thought that people view you, or excuse me, you view yourself as other people view you, or as you think other people view you. So everywhere you go, if you're talking to somebody and they're like, hey, how's it going? And they're always super friendly and happy and just giving you compliments, you're gonna be like, oh, I'm pretty cool, things are going well. But if everybody you see is kind of mean to you, you're gonna think that you're worthless or whatever, okay? So the looking glass self basically says your perception of yourself comes from how you think others perceive you. So that's the looking glass self. Again, C.H. Cooley came up with that. Now, George Herbert Mead came up with the concept of the self, which he identified as the part of your personality, which is made up of like your self-awareness or self-concept. So there's some interesting research with this in how it's tied to memory. This is kind of an aside. How it's tied to memory, and then also infantile amnesia. You know how you don't remember stuff when you're really little? And some of the thinking behind that is because you don't have language acquisition that can tie and connect with the part of your personality that basically says, I'm a unique person. Like, I know that I'm real and I'm a person and stuff like that. So that also relates to something called the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis that we talked about, if you remember that. Who remembers what the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis discusses? Sapir-Whorf hypothesis has to do with language.
That everyone thinks the same? Or do you think in different languages?
It has to do with language and thinking, you're right. Go a little bit deeper though. What does the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis believe about language and thinking and values? Remember we used the example of money? I did an activity in both classes where I talked about money.
We had to like write.
The more we value something, the more slang terms we have for it.
Yep. The more you as a person or a society as a whole values something, the more slang terms you have for it. And in addition to that, the more slang terms you have for something and the more words you have for something, the more deeply you can think about it. So language and thought are connected. That's the argument that the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis makes. So like my daughter can say words for everything related to My Little Ponies. Like Princess Celestia and Applejack and like you name it. Like, so she watches the show and she sees the pony and she's like, oh, this is this pony's name and they have this power and she knows all the names for it. Christian watches the show and he's like, there's a white pony that has like rainbows or something, right? Okay. So Sapir-Whorf hypothesis, again, language and thought are connected because when you think, you're thinking in part as a narration, right? So another related concept with that, again with the name of a person, is the W.I. Thomas theorem. The W.I. Thomas theorem. The Thomas theorem says that what's perceived as real is real in its consequences. What's perceived as real is real in its consequences. Or, more formally stated, situations defined as real are real in their consequences. So, we had a situation 2 days ago, I think, in Fargo, where some guy jumped out of a car and pulled a BB gun on a cop. And what did the cop do? Shot him. So he has to assume that's a real gun, right? Because it looks like a real gun, it's shaped like a real gun, all that. So the officer is responding as if that's a real gun, right? So, and the officer should get cleared of any wrongdoing, right? He has to assume it's a real gun. So that relates to that concept of the W.I. Thomas theorem again. Another person we talked about a decent amount was Freud. If you remember, Freud is mostly associated with socialization and personality. He believed that our personality consisted of three components. What were those three components?
Id, ego, and superego.
Id, ego, and superego. Which part demands immediate attention, like wants what it wants right away? The id. Which one functions as your conscious? Superego. And then what's like trying to balance the two?
Ego.
The ego. Okay. So be able to identify those as well. We also discussed some theories of moral development. The two main theorists that talked about that were Carol Gilligan and Lawrence Kohlberg. Gilligan and Kohlberg. So with Kohlberg, there were three levels of moral reasoning, if you remember, right? Pre-conventional, conventional, and post-conventional. What's the key thing in each level? What determines morality in each level? In pre-conventional, the thing that, and this progresses by age for most people, right? The thing that determines right or wrongness in pre-conventional is how it feels to the individual making the moral choice. So if you're a kid, you go up, you punch somebody and take a cookie. Like, the cookie was good, I wanted the cookie. It's okay because I wanted the cookie, right? If you're at the conventional level, it's rules. So rules, like laws, whatever, determine what's right or wrong. And then the last one, post-conventional, what determines right or wrong. I used an example of how I drove like 90 miles an hour down this road.
Because your wife
Because my wife was like in labor, right? So I don't feel guilty. I knew I was breaking the law, but I don't morally feel guilty about speeding because like I had to get home. It was a medical emergency, right? So if you talk to somebody and you're like, that was wrong because all you were doing was breaking the law, and that's what determines right or wrong, they're in the conventional level. Okay? Okay, two of the people that we did not talk about in either class really because we ran out of time a little bit. One class because of the pep rally, and the other class, like half the class missed for a field trip, right? Was Weber with a W. So he's a German guy. Looks like Weber, like Charlie Weber, but it's pronounced Weber. So Max Weber, and then Rostow is the other one. Rostow. So Weber, the big thing that he talked about was social changes that were related to industrialization and the Protestant Reformation. And then Weber also writes extensively on bureaucracies, which is a concept that's discussed in chapter 5 towards the end. That pen's been in my trunk, or my middle thing for a while, so it probably...
Yeah, well, I kind of deserve this. I just stayed till 1 o'clock both nights. That's why I forgot everything.
Studying and stuff? Or...
Yeah, finishing my stuff. So,
yeah.
Thank you very much.
I'll do that. I'm just going to use it to put dots when I talk about stuff, but you could have kept using it, but I was just warning you that it probably would die on you. So anyways, Rostow talked about in his research how societies tend to go through stages of modernization, and you can identify trends in those societies based on how much technology they've adopted, basically. So when you get a chance, read a little bit more thoroughly about that, but that would help you with it, okay? Now, let's talk about that concept just in general. The idea that we can look at specific situations of people and then make broad general conclusions about society, or do the other way as well, look at broad society and make predictions about people. That's applying what sociologists call the sociological imagination, okay? It's using inductive and deductive reasoning to make conclusions. So if an example of this that would apply to social media would be, how you on Facebook or whatever, and they ask you to identify what's your sex, where do you live, what are things that you like, right? Give me 10 random data points about somebody on Facebook, and I can make a fairly good prediction about what they're like as a person, right? So especially if you get where they're from, occupation, age, sex, religious views, maybe political orientation, you give me 10 of those variables, I can make a pretty good prediction about what they're gonna act like, right? So that's applying that concept of the sociological imagination, okay? Now, there's 3 ways that people do this, that they apply the sociological imagination. It's called positivist, critical, and interpretive sociology. This is a review back from chapter 1. Positivist, interpretive, and critical. And each one of those views aligns with one of the main theories in sociology. So you remember the 3 main theories? Functionalism, conflict theory, and SI? Which one's going to align most with conflict theory? That's the easiest one. Critical. Conflict theorists look at society and think, let's fix the bad stuff, okay? Which one's going to align with interpretive? SI, because it's all about interpreting the situations that people engage in, right? And then that leaves us the last one, positivist, which is also known as scientific. That's more of a functional approach. So functionalists try to describe what's happening, right? What happens. Conflict theorists try to change things. Interpretive sociologists try to describe what people think about what's happening, okay? Or how people create meaning in their social situations. Okay, now think back to those three main perspectives: functionalism, conflict theory, and symbolic interaction. Which two are macro?
Functionalism, conflict.
Conflict and functionalism. Conflict and functionalism. SI is micro. So micro is going to look at like small groups like us. Let's say if they were studying education, they would study us and try to figure out how do we interpret education. Macro theorists are going to look at like data for how the average student does on the ACT, or what percentage of students fail classes, or how many take advanced courses, or whatever, right? Okay. So be able to identify like which theory is being applied in those situations. Another major concept that gets discussed as well is the status, roles, role set, master status, all that. So that's like the main idea from chapter 4, basically. So let's just break those down point by point. And let's just use me as an example again. So things like husband, teacher, father, what would those be? Statuses, okay? Father, husband, and teacher, are those all ascribed statuses or achieved statuses? Achieved, yep. So if you choose to adopt a status, it's achieved. If you don't choose, it's ascribed, okay? So like son, what would son be? Ascribed, like I don't have a choice in that matter, right? So master status then would be the status that influences you the most. That can change based on seasons of your life, based on what's going on, all that. Now, there's different behaviors that are expected with each status. What's that called? A role. Okay. Yep. So you've got what's called a role set. That would be all the expected behavior tied to a single status. Whereas a status set is all the behavior, or all the statuses that a person holds at a time, okay? Then you also have what's called role conflict and role strain. So I'm experiencing a little bit of role conflict right now because my kids are being a little crazy, but I knew that this started at 8, right? So me being a teacher and doing this and trying to help my wife get my kids ready for bed, there's conflict that was experienced, right? So role strain is where you have a struggle or a difficulty that results from the expected behavior tied to a single status. So police officers are good examples for that because they're expected to enforce the law and kind of pull people over, but they also want people to trust them and not be afraid of them and stuff. So there's kind of, I mean, who in here, you see like cherries go up, you could be like totally never got pulled over in your life, not doing anything wrong at all. You hear cherries or hear the sound and then look up and see that in the mirror. Do you get a little afraid? Like, oh, what did I do? Right? Okay. So they experience that to a degree. Okay. So there's also sub-theories that come off of the main theories. So like with conflict theory, they have what's called the racial conflict approach or the gender conflict approach. It's a sub-theory off the main theory. In SI theory, they have other theories that are kind of sub-theories or related, such as dramaturgy, which we saw a video clip on and discussed. What's the analogy that dramaturgy uses? Yeah, like a play or a set, exactly. So you have to figure out who's the actors, who's the audience, what is their roles, what's their costume, what are their props, all that stuff, okay? Another sub-theory is something called ethnomethodology, which was discussed a little bit in the text, and I think we had a quiz question on, but I didn't talk about it too much. ethnomethodology basically says, or assumes that the key to understanding society is understanding the norms. And if you want to understand how those norms function or how powerful they are, you got to break the norms to figure it out, right? So you don't really know what norms are or how strong they are until you break them, and then you can learn a lot about it, right? Okay. So I'm going to take a little break now and ask if anybody has any questions to clarify about anything I've discussed so far. Because I've kind of been like just spitting or speaking a lot.
I do. So the status set is all of your statuses that you have?
That you hold at a given time. Yep.
So are there going to be like questions on, you give an example and you're like, okay, is this functionalism, conflict theory, and essay?
Yeah, I've been kind of sprinkling in a lot of little things to help you review for that so far. But I'm still going to go about 20 more minutes probably, but I just wanted to
Okay, so
stop.
role conflict is when like two different roles. Like
Two different statuses.
Two different statuses.
Yep.
But then, what is role strain exactly?
That's when you experience a struggle or a difficulty tied to a single status.
Okay.
Because all statuses are nouns basically, whereas roles describe verbs associated with that noun. Does that make sense? Okay. So if you hold a status, let's say it's police officer again. Okay. Which reminds me, tomorrow I'm going to play a video in class. Balvik's dad. It's pretty good. Remember that? The pep rally?
Oh,
Officer
yeah.
Balvik. Yeah.
Just hitting the whip.
They had a dance off. Pearson and Balvik. It was hilarious. So yeah, somebody Snapchatted it. Yeah. Figured it would hit. So anyways, I have a status of, again, teacher. I have a status of father. Those are two different statuses, right? Now, teacher has a bunch of expected behavior with it, right? So if any of those expected behaviors with teacher, like grade keeper, question and answer, whatever, if any of those roles conflict with a role that's associated with the status of being a parent, since it's a separate status, that's called role conflict. Now, for teacher again, I have a bunch of expected behavior tied to that, like grader, rule enforcer, student, mood uplifter, I don't know, whatever you want to call it, right? So rule enforcer sometimes gets in the way of like making the class an enjoyable environment, whatever you want to phrase that, right? So you have to, like, there's been classes I've taught in the past where I've had like 2 or 3 students that were just really disruptive, and I couldn't like be as like laid back or make as many jokes or whatever. I had to kind of be a Nazi, you know? So I was experiencing role strain in that instance, okay? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. All right, anybody else?
So who was the looking glass self? Who did that?
Looking glass self is C.H. Cooley, Charles Horton Cooley. That's an SI concept that basically says people believe their perceptions of what they think others believe about them. If that makes sense. So let's say, let me use an example. Let's say, you know, I'm doing this study with Twitter, right? Where I'm tweeting stuff and all that. And then like, all of you but like 3 people really think that it's a great idea and like the class and everything, right? But there's like 2 people that can't stand it and they tweet a whole bunch about how they hate it, right? And that's all I see. What am I gonna think?
They don't
I'm gonna think that people hate it. And then I'm gonna think like, oh, I'm doing a bad job, whatever. Even though, in reality, most people think it's a good idea, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so that's kind of tied to that W.I. Thomas theorem also. What's perceived as real is real, its consequences. Okay? All right, let's move on a little bit. Again, I'll give some time at the end, okay? Remember, when we were introducing sociology as by definition was the systematic study of society. We try to do it in an organized way. One of the first people to point out how social factors could influence behavior was a European sociologist named Emil Durkheim. Okay, what did Durkheim study specifically?
We don't need to know like their first names or anything.
No, if you just remember their last name, you'd be okay. Yeah, and it's not like you have to fill in the blank. You just need to identify what they came up with. Yeah. But with Durkheim, what did he study?
Wasn't it like social forces for like suicide?
Yep. Social integration, like how connected people were and how that related to suicide. Yep. Okay, if you're in a society where like men control everything, what is that called? Patriarchal. Yeah, exactly. Okay, if it's women control everything, it's matriarchal. Yeah. Now there's a related term that's called androcentric. So andro is a prefix that basically means male, right? So if you're androcentric, you're too focused on approaching things from a male point of view. If you saw now, today I scheduled a ton of tweets that were basically designed to help you do the Mean Girls analysis and study for this. Anybody see that? Like I did one every roughly half hour today. So I tweeted something about androcentric, right? Did anybody see that one? It basically said the movie Mean Girls is not androcentric because it's mostly from a female's perspective. It's focused on female, right? So as an aside now, if you pay attention to those tweets, like that should help you do the assignment and study too, okay? All right, so again, androcentric, be able to identify that concept and be aware of it. Remember how I talked about Rousseau and how he believed that in terms of technological development, you can identify trends in society, okay? In earlier societies, you had like hunter-gatherer societies, and then you shifted to societies that were like pastoral or horticulturally based, so like farming and ranching on a small scale basically. And then later we industrialized, and now it's like information age, okay? Way back in the day, in the societies that were like hunter-gatherer, who did most of the hunting? Males or females? Males, yeah, exactly. Okay? And so be able to identify some trends about what those societies are like, okay? I learned a couple years ago that I have to make sure I have a book or something. One of the videos I posted had like a full view of a couple pages because I was holding it up. Yeah. You're like, darn, I figured that out. Remember how we talked about the concept of culture quite a bit, right? So culture is the way of life of people who share a common, background, setting, all that. Society basically is culture that interacts in a defined boundary, like in a state or in a country, okay? Now you can break down cultures into subcultures. You can also identify cultures in a number of different ways, such as a counterculture, right? Some of the terms we talked about in class included popular culture and high culture. So, using something like an example, give me an example of each. Go ahead.
Pop culture would be any people who are popular on social media. And an example of high culture would be having a status of wealth or being wealthy. Am I correct or incorrect?
Yep, you are. I was looking for like a specific example though.
I did when I tweet on like the high was like a small like locally owned restaurant, and then like the pop was like Applebee's.
Okay, so to use a West Fargo example, Maxwell's, you guys know what that is?
Yeah.
Okay, that's by Domino's, like near Subway on the intersection of 13th and 9th. I haven't eaten there yet. If you get out of there and it's about $100.
Crazy and super expensive.
Yeah, like $100 for two people is probably a little bit less than average, I think. Does that sound right from what you heard?
Yeah.
So That'd be more like high culture, right? Whereas Applebee's, if we're going out and eat, is kind of pop culture. Okay? So high culture is what is common in the elite in society. Pop culture is like what everybody does. Does that make sense? Okay. We also talked about ethnocentrism and multiculturalism. So if you're ethnocentric, you have a tendency to look at things only from like your perspective, your ethnic background's perspective. Multiculturalism basically seeks to try to judge cultures in maybe a broader lens or a like more open-minded way maybe. So conflict theorists often will analyze culture and say that dominant cultures exist to oppress other cultures, and like countries like in Europe, they can't handle, in part of the reason they're having problems handling the immigration crisis is because they're so set in their ways they can't see things from other people's perspectives, right? We also talked about the role that social interaction plays in socialization, right? We use the examples of Victor, Jeannie, and Anna, okay? Victor, Jeannie, and Anna. They were three little kids that didn't have a lot of interaction, and then they found them and tried to help them. And what was the ultimate result of that? Like, did they totally fix them and everything, or no? So what was the ultimate result then? Okay.
Socially, they're like permanently damaged.
Yep.
They lost those years of their lives and they couldn't think about it.
Yep. And the thinking is that you have what's called a critical period in your life where if you don't accomplish certain growth, it's very, very, very hard to teach that to you later. So language is an example. They also think that we wouldn't really be able to tell for sure because like Jeannie and Anna couldn't really communicate. But remember that Sapir-Whorf hypothesis we talked about before? If we buy part of that language and thought are connected, and Jeannie and Anna couldn't really communicate, they couldn't speak in words, the argument then follows that they couldn't think in the same manner as the average person, right? Thinking was hindered too. So be able to identify some of the consequences of social isolation. With socialization, obviously the essay question talks about the four main agents of socialization, but it also talks about some of the research with that. So what's the most important, like, for the average person, if this agent of socialization is messed up, their life is going to be difficult. Which one is that?
Family.
Yeah, the family. So you give, the research on that's pretty clear. You give somebody a really, really good family, and that gives them a better chance, basically, than other people, right? It's not like universal, to use my personal example, my parents functioned fairly well when I was younger, and my mom, I think, generally did a good job, but my dad had a lot of problems, right? So, I think despite my paranoia, in some ways, I think I'm generally pretty well adjusted. Like here, I intentionally picked this spot because I got to see the door where most people come in. That's like every restaurant I go to, I have to do that. It's kind of freaking me out that there's another exit over there.
Are you serious?
Yeah, I'm serious. Like, because if somebody came in behind me and like tried to like pretend choke me out, I'd probably turn around and punch them. I'd be like freaked out. Okay? So, despite stuff like that, I think I'm doing okay. You guys are all like, wait till he leaves and we'll tell him we're good. Okay, we also did a lot of analysis on humor, right? And I did a tweet about this if you noticed it, right? So, functionalists would say, what does humor do? What is its function? Because everything functionalists try to analyze, they assume that if something exists in society, it has a purpose, right? If it doesn't have a purpose, it's going to cease to exist in society, okay? So what does humor do then? Entertain. And it provides a way that people can analyze and look at things that are uncomfortable just to talk about openly, right? What do conflict theorists think humor does? What does anything do to conflict theorists?
It provokes.
Yeah, it's a tool used by one group to kind of put down the other group, and then the conflict that results from that leads to social change. Yeah. Now, SI theorists analyze it from a micro perspective. They want to see how people interpret humorous things. That's the main exercise that we did in class, right? Scale 1 to 10, how funny was it? Why was it funny? Why wasn't it funny? That varies from some people to the other. Like I showed my wife those nature videos. I'm like, scale 1 to 10, how funny do you think it is? She's like, 3. Okay, and some people think those are just hilarious, right? Dumb and Dumber would be a good example, right?
Yeah.
Dumb and Dumber is like a 10 or a 9 or like a 2 for a lot of people, right?
Yeah.
There's not a lot of in between for Dumb and Dumber, okay? You're like a 2 or what?
No, I think it's pretty funny, but my mom thinks it's really, really stupid.
Okay. Yeah, I think it's pretty funny. Okay.
You show me those videos and then like clicked on them and I'm like, oh my god, again.
Okay, we also talked a lot about, in terms of functionalism, the difference, like terms related to that, like manifest function, latent function, dysfunctions, right? Let's use this study sessions in general, okay? So we could use this instance specifically, but that's a little more micro focus, right? Study sessions in general. What's the manifest function of study sessions?
To review the information.
Yep.
Help learn.
Yep, so it's to help the students to remember what they've learned or study, okay? So that's the intended social consequence of the review session. What's a latent function then?
It's like the consequences that aren't like intended.
So like us like getting together like with friends is an unintended one.
Right.
Yeah, like getting to know each other more is like unintended.
Yep.
Rather than just like the purpose is coming
Yep.
here to study.
So latent functions aren't necessarily bad, they're just unintended, right? So you might not know, like, I was gonna say you might not know her, but
No,
you guys are
not
like
at all.
BFFs, so. But anyways, you might not know somebody, but you get to know them. Maybe after I leave, you sit around and talk to somebody you didn't know that well and study for a little bit, and then you get to know them a little bit more, right? Okay? So, whereas a dysfunction is something that messes up the operation of society, okay? So be able to identify like what's a manifest function. If you get a scenario, which one's manifest, which one's latent, okay? Yeah, and then like there's a whole page basically where it's a scenario, and then it asks you which theory is it, like functionalism, SI, conflict theory, and then it has some other ones in there, like ethnomethodology and exchange theory. So remember, with ethnomethodology, that's basically a related discipline with SI theory, where they violate norms, and then they see how people respond, and then that helps them to learn what's important in society. So you go like, I don't know, this always drives me a little bonkers because I think it's kind of like, sometimes they don't need to do it, and it, I don't know, but I get it. But anyways, there's some guys, I'm a strength coach at West Fargo, right? And there's some guys that when they go in and lift before practice, they always have to have their shirt off. And I'm like, you're laying on the bench and you're sweating, and other people laid on it and sweating, and there's like skin diseases that can spread, you know what I mean? Like that's a wrestling thing too, right? So I'll talk to them and I'm like, hey guys, like you can get skin diseases from this, you know, you don't want to do that. But they still always come in without their shirt on, right? Okay. So go back to ethnomethodology, right? You break norms and see how people respond. I talk to them. Do I make that big of a deal about it? No. Okay. Go to a fitness center, the wellness or wherever else, and work out without your shirt on once. You know, try it and see what's going to happen. How long would it take somebody to come talk to you?
A minute.
Okay. What if it was a girl that did that? Would I have responded differently?
Yeah.
Definitely. Okay. But maybe if we went to France or somewhere else, it would be different, right? So ethnomethodologists will like break rules like that, or intentionally break rules, see how people respond to figure out how society
So like,
works.
what would you do? Kind of like that kind of.
Sort of. Yep. Yep. Go ahead.
Just a thing in France. If you take your shirt off, nudity is a thing there. I went there this summer and there was like people walking around and like, I'm gonna go back to the hotel.
They didn't care.
No.
Yeah. Kind of like locker rooms. You work out at a wellness place, there's always like 80-year-old dude, like no shame at all. It's like when you're a baby, like a little kid, no shame, right? I get home, I'm like, Natalie, why aren't you wearing pants? She had underwear on, but she's like, it was warm. She runs around, I'm like, whatever. Okay? Once you hit a certain age, then you feel shame, and then once you get old, you're like, whatever, right? You agree? Yeah, it's kind of funny. Okay, so exchange theory now is a micro theory that basically says that, we'll talk about this more when we get to chapter 6 also and 7, but basically says that people subconsciously kind of keep score almost in their head. So any social interaction they engage in has positives and negatives. If the positives outweigh the negative, they're going to be more likely to continue it. Make sense? So whether you're going to take a class or go to a certain college or whatever, like I remember I would do this a lot when I was younger and trying to make decisions, or when I was in college. I would, if I couldn't decide between like two classes, I would draw a line down a piece of paper like this and write pro on one side and write con on the other, and I'd literally like write down what I was going to do. Like if you watch How I Met Your Mother, Ted Mosby does that, and they make fun of him all the time. Is that what you're saying or not?
No, I was saying that's me.
Oh, that's you? Okay, so exchange theorists think people do that in their head basically all the time. Okay? So there's, like I said, there's a whole page where it gives you a scenario and you have to identify which of those 5 theories it is. Okay? Okay, remember also how we talked about, like, the assignment had the groups for chapter 5. You had to tweet which group you belong to. Primary, secondary, reference, and social. Yep. So there's a scenario basically where you have to be able to identify those as well. If you did the tweet and you understood it, you'd be fine. So like primary group, give me an example. Family, you two, right? Okay. People you're really close to. Primary group. Okay. Secondary group.
Like the people that you interact with, like just like
Like a sports team.
For a purpose. Yep. Yep. It's not just to hang out and have fun. It's like it's task focused. Reference groups are groups that you compare yourself to. Like I want to be like them. Okay. And then remember, just social groups. Any two people that identify with each other and interact with a purpose. Okay. So I have a couple scenarios with that. And you guys like this, like I take the test scenarios. It's me like getting ready. That made somebody else jump a little bit, right? Besides you.
Oh,
I jumped.
Yeah. So I totally lost my train of thought when that guy did that. What was I talking about?
talking about you
Scenarios.
take.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So on the test, like I put people's names. It's kind of funny. Randomly for scenarios.
Say that.
really?
Yeah. Yeah, there's nothing like real
I
bad.
hope
There's one that's kind of funny. I always do it in the final. But it makes sense, I think, okay? Okay. So I also have a section where I give you details about a guy, and you have to identify what's his master status, what's his status set, what's his role, stuff like that. Okay, there's like 5 questions. So there's a part where you have to define those terms, and there's a part where you have to apply them. Okay? So I'm not going to take a lot of time explaining that. What time is it now, by the way?
8:50.
Okay. I see SVU is still on, so it must still be 8:50.
That's what I gauge on too.
Yeah. You see what's on, and then
Sometimes.
yep,
Okay, whatever.
that works. That's my wife has that down to a science with like Caillou and Sesame Street, and I'll be like, "What show's on now?" Or "What time is it?" And she'll look at the TV. Well, Word World is on, so it's 10:30. Okay.
My mom does that too.
Yeah. Yep. Do you have a little brother or sister that's
Yeah,
young? Or?
he's 2.5.
Okay.
The TV doesn't go off the Sprout channel.
Yeah. So what's his favorite show?
Yeah, he likes that, and he really likes Thomas the Train.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
That's his thing.
Yeah, my son likes Thomas too. Okay. I think I pretty much hit everything, but I'm gonna again give a little bit of time for people to ask questions. So, are there any questions that people have? You want me to clarify something, or if there was something I didn't talk about that you maybe don't understand? Obviously, and this goes for people watching too, I didn't like literally cover every single thing that's on the test, because I still believe that you guys should read and study and all that. But I still wanted to give you a good idea and give you a head start in kind of preparing. So, any questions about anything?
Do we need to like reread all of the chapters, or should we just like go through the review on like the back of the chapters?
I think that depends on who you are and how well you remember stuff. If I was in your shoes and I felt fairly confident in my thoroughness of reading previously, I would just reread through the summaries. And then if there was something in the summary, how you have those pages at the end?
Yeah,
right?
32.
There's one on 32? Okay, so you have the chapter summary pages that look like this.
Yeah.
So if I you see how it tells you the page number also? So let's say I'm like, I understand all this, I get all this, but this is a little fuzzy. I probably would go back and reread through just that section, not the whole thing again. Just for time management. And that's, you go to college and you got 15 credits, 5 classes, because there are 3 credit classes in college, right? And some of them, you kind of have to pick and choose what you're gonna study for, because you couldn't possibly read thoroughly every single thing you're assigned to read, as detailed as you would want to, probably. So it wouldn't be uncommon for me to average in a week 200 pages of reading combined. So and not just I'm reading a book that's telling a story about Harry Potter or whoever, social theory or ed psychology, stuff like that. So so that's a good skill to learn.
Should we just do the review videos that we're talking about?
Well, what I would do, think about what we talked about. Maybe you want to fast forward and rewatch this later, and then on Twitter, follow some of the tweets. I'm not tweeting things just because I'm this is fun, blah blah blah. I'm trying to tweet stuff that helps you to learn, right? So if you look through some of that, I think it would be helpful. And try to come up with scenarios, give examples. Don't just define role conflict or status set or whatever. When you're studying, try to think mentally about examples, or ask your friend if you're studying together, right? Okay, go ahead.
Are we going to have to know something about front stage, off stage, and back stage?
I think there's one question about that, but it's not super detailed, so yeah. That's not a major concept.
Is there short answers, or is it just the essay and then multiple choice?
Yep, so you'll turn in the take-home essay.
Mm-hmm.
It's 50 matching in groups of 10, and then it's 50 multiple choice with 5 options. Typically people get I bet the class average on the first 50 in matching is 90%. It's usually really well done. Multiple choice tends to be people, there's a lot more variance. People do pretty well or they do kind of bad.
Between 2 answers.
Yeah, it's that part I designed to be challenging. You guys got to work. So. What did you say?
People who didn't study.
Yeah, that's true.
So are there going to be questions on words that aren't vocab words from the reading?
I don't know for sure. I guess I would not. The vocab words and the stuff that's on the review pages, obviously that's more of an emphasis. But.
So that Durkheim guy who
Yeah.
did the suicide experiment,
Yeah.
is it going to be a question who did this experiment,
At
or is it
times.
going to, okay.
Yeah.
So we have to, even if there's not a vocab word in that section, we have to know the experiments pretty well?
Yeah, so
Or is it just when they kind of coined a term?
yeah, so to give you an example, there might be a question where it asks you who the theorist was and what they studied. So if you like Solomon Ash we talked about, the guy that did the line study. So if you remember that he did the line study and you remember kind of what it was about, that would be helpful. So if you're studying in person, I would say, okay, what are they most known for? And then what did they find out? Okay, so name, what are they most known for? And then what did they find out? That would, if you kind of approach it that way, I think it would help you. Okay? Anybody else? All done? All right. I'm gonna stop. Just close it and it'll stop.